Is it all in how you raise them? In this video, I'm going to be talking about why that's not always the case. So you hear about this all the time when it comes to dogs. People will say things like, oh, if you raise them right, they'll be fine. If you raise them right, they won't be aggressive. People have these fantasies when it comes to dogs behaving a certain way, having nothing to do with the genetics or the temperament of the animal and everything to do with the person itself. It's easy to point the finger at the person and go, you must be the reason why your dog does this, that, and the other. You must be the reason why your dog is aggressive. Well, even though it's an easy scapegoat, even though it's an easy blame, it's not always the case. As a matter of fact, most of the time it's not the case. And I can tell you this because you can see it on the flip side. What I mean by that is sometimes you're going to see dogs that are amazing, nice, friendly, they love people, they love dogs, they love everybody, and their owners are pretty shitty. Their owners are not the best owners. They don't pay attention to them. They don't socialize them. They're not nice to them. And then yet these dogs continue to be nice model citizens when it comes to people and dogs. Well, what does that happen? Well, it had nothing to do with the owner. It had 90% to do with the dog's genetics and the dog's temperament. So this is why that saying of it's all in how you raise them is entirely inaccurate. Now, it's easy to believe that, but it's not always the case. So I'm going to go into a lot more detail. This chapter also is coming from this book, Common Myths About Dogs. You can find it on Amazon. It's a book I wrote several years ago. It's got a bunch of myths about dogs, dog training, a bunch of stuff that I break down here. And in this video, I'm going to be breaking it down. Also, I'm going to be reviewing some of my work. So this is what I do. I've written a bunch of these books years ago. My knowledge, my experience, and my view on dog training and life in general has evolved. So as I look back on some of these books, it's interesting for me to see the way I wrote things, the way I felt about things. And certainly a lot of times it's the same. Maybe I use more tactful language now. But some instances and some things that I read, I'm like, no, I wouldn't have written that way. I would have used different language. I would have addressed it differently. I would have communicated differently. So that's essentially what I'm doing in these videos. So let's go back to it's all in how you raise them. As much as I would love for this to be true, it isn't. Raising them properly will in fact give your dog the best possible chance of being a good member of society, but unfortunately, it isn't all of it 100% on the same page as the old William that wrote this. I'm going to go back to temperament. If you have a male that has strong tendencies for aggression, for example, and a female with the same tendencies, it is very likely that the litter from that union will have the same tendencies, or that it may be passed on to the next generation. So what I would do a little bit different here is, I wouldn't say that's temperament like I originally started on this, on this paragraph. That's more genetic. Okay, so that is more of a genetic tendency. If you have a male and a female with both very strong aggressive tendencies, and they pass it down to their litter, this is a genetic component. Temperament is independent of genetics, meaning you could have a very aggressive male, a very aggressive female get together, they have a litter, and the chances of the litter being aggressive in some way is very high. However, there will be some in that litter that have no desire to be aggressive at all because their temperament sometimes overrides a little bit of that genetic tendency. Now, it doesn't mean that it can be passed on to their offspring. It can, because there's a genetic component that came from their parents that could be passed to their offspring. But anyway, so that's what I would do a little bit different. I would clarify that this is not temperament, as I alluded to at the beginning of this paragraph. It's more genetic. Now, getting back to the book, this doesn't mean that the dogs are doomed, but it does mean that they will be a challenge for your average person. Okay? training, communication, and proper outlets will have to be top priorities for a dog with these tendencies, and I 100% agree with that. I'm going to tell you a little bit about a couple of clients that I've talked to recently. Now, these clients are committed. I mean, they love their dogs. They've invested the time, they've invested the resources, good owners, people that I trust with my dogs, with any dogs. But you can see, and they are aware of this, I'm aware of this, that it is a challenge sometimes living with some of the dogs that they have. You know, they have these dogs that are great dogs, they do a great job, they're very proactive, but if the dog that they have has this bit of a kick for conflict, you know, they have this bit of a tendency to being aggressive towards other dogs, it's always going to be there if it's part of their genetic or temperament envelope. So what the owner has to do is the owner has to be incredibly proactive, which a lot of these owners that invest the resources and the time are, but it's something that is always kind of there, and they're aware of it, right? They'll tell me, I follow up with all of my clients, and so, you know, they'll tell me, yes, you know, does great, but every once in a while we'll have these little episodes where, you know, he'll try to go at the other dog, he'll you know, or she'll just give the other dog this look, and then, you know, she'll want to charge. So it's every once in a while, if they kind of let their guard down a little bit, it rears its ugly head. And this is not a reflection on the owners. This is a reflection on the dog's genetic envelope. It's a reflection of the dog's temperament also. So back to the book, on the flip side, I've seen dogs that are treated terribly, had the worst disadvantages in their upbringing, but the temperament and the disposition of the dog allowed for these bad experiences to occur without affecting their behavior, right? And this goes back to temperament. That certainly is the case. Temperament, genetic. Now, genetics and temperament are related, but they're not the same. Genetics come from mom and dad, somewhere in the family tree. Temperament is independence. Temperament is the dog's combination of experiences, perceptions. It's a combination of that, plus maybe some other genetics. It's basically their world view. Okay, it's just like you and I have different personalities. Your personality has been shaped by your upbringing. It's been shaped by your experiences and the perceptions of those experiences, which make you a very unique individual compared to me, right? I also have my own experiences, my own upbringing, my own perceptions, and the way I experience things and the way I tell myself the stories about these things that I've experienced, and that's my personality. Very different than yours, very different than the person next to you. So dogs have the same thing. Dogs have these same unique traits about them that are inherently theirs, independent of their genetics. So that's the difference between the genetic tendencies and the temperament. If you like this episode, make sure you go to the YouTube channel, go to the podcast, make sure you follow me on the podcast, subscribe to the YouTube channel, and check out this book. If you've read it, I would love a review. I would love your feedback, and I'll see you guys in the next episode.